My name is Otto Deutsch. I was born in the beautiful city of Vienna, but my early life in Vienna was less than beautiful.
Can I ask how old you are?
I was born in 1928. I'm 83. I shall be 84 in July.
Do you remember any of your early childhood experiences?
Oh, very much so. One never forgets certain things. And what I remember most of all is the horrendous Kristallnacht, Crystal Night, which was the 9th of November, 1938, when a group of young, well, I call them thugs, because that's what they were, broke into our little flat and took my father. I was never to see my father again. But what was the most horrendous experience for me was that the man who led this band of Hitler Youths was a man whom I called Uncle, my next door neighbor. A man who was with my father in the trenches in the First World War. They knew each other for 20 odd years, became the best friends, and literally our neighbor in his big tenement building that we lived. I couldn't believe it. I was 10.5 years of age. That's Uncle Kurt. And it was he who showed these young Hitler Youth, that's the Jew, take him. And I was never ever to see him again. But my sister and my mother were to see him again, because they hadn't yet come to the final solution. They took my father to a place called Dachau, which was the first concentration camp. And after a short spell in Dachau, they took him to Germany, to Saxony, to what was known in German as the Zwangsarbeiter. That's compulsory workers, slave workers in other words, who helped to build the Autobahn, the motorway. Much later on, I became a tour guide, and often with a coach we crossed these modern Autobahns, and the people would compliment the ingenuity and the engineering of the Germans, but they didn't know who built those motorways, because the very early motorways were not built by a trade union labor, and my father was one of the many.
Did you have any plans to leave Vienna?
Well, I was only 10.5 years of age.
You mean your family?
Yes, they had. In fact, my mother would queue up outside the Israelitische Kultusgemeinde. That's the German, I beg your pardon, the Jewish Welfare Board, night after night. In fact,
trying to get an exit visa?
No, we didn't require an exit visa, but what we required is permission not to leave, but to land. We had to have permission from the British government to be one of the 10,000 children who were granted entry, and my mother was anxious that I should be on the list. And I remember that morning when my mother came, cuddled me, kissed me. She said, "Otto, you're going to England." Well, I knew England. Britain was an island. I'd learned this. England? I'd never been away before. Well, when are we going? No, Otto, not we, but you.
How did you feel about that, being separated from your family?
Well, at first I felt very excited. I was going to see the sea. I'd never seen the sea before. Austria is completely landlocked. And when she told me that it was only going to be me, I felt, of course, very sad. I'd never known to be away from home. And
as a young boy, did you know why you had to leave?
I wasn't quite sure. Unfortunately, there were some children who thought their mothers don't want them anymore. They were sending them away. I already understood that they were nasty people. And to go back to the Crystal Night, if I may, it was really because of the Crystal Night that there was an all-night sitting at Westminster, where it was one of the first all-night sittings, where it was agreed to allow 10,000 unaccompanied children into Britain with a mass visa.
So it was a quota then?
It was a quota, and that's why my mother was so anxious to be able to put me in the quota, because it was organized in Vienna by the Jewish authorities.
So the British authorities were only going to allow children, not the mothers and the fathers?
No, only, and it was even said on a temporary basis. Ironic, after 75 years I'm here on a temporary basis. That was never rescinded, of course, then the war started.
Yes. So tell me about when you were accompanied to the train station.
It was my sister and my mother. I remember this so vividly that I am absolutely surprised that this happened so many years ago. At the station there was, of course, a long wait. We expected that. And then finally came the announcement that all children were to go to the platform, for the train that was to take us had now arrived at the platform. But they were to be unaccompanied. And what is more, the announcer said, I remember this distinctly, that there were to be no signs of emotion. In other words, no crying.
No tears.
No tears. And I felt, well, at 10 and a half, I'm a man. We men, we don't cry. The girls cry, but we men, we don't cry. And my mother...
Who took you to the station?
My mother and my sister. My father was no longer there. And...
Did you know where your father was?
Well, we had information after queuing up outside the police headquarters that he had been taken to Dachau. Ah. But that's all we knew.
Okay.
But my mother turned her back on me because she realized that if I was to see her cry, I wouldn't be such a big man. To this very day, I still regret that I didn't have a last cuddle with my mother. But it was, as far as I was concerned, only a temporary parting.
Did you have any friends come with you?
My cousin. My cousin who lives in Cheam in Surrey.
So tell me about the train journey.
Do you know, it's amazing. I remember so many things, but not much about the train journey. Until we got to the Dutch border. And at the Dutch border, I remember distinctly what happened. And I've got here something which reminds me of this. Because having shown my passport almost constantly, I was required once again to show my passport by this border control man. And he took this passport off of me, and I thought he was going to destroy it. But happily in the last moment, he gave it back to me. I've got this here, and there's a crease in the middle of this passport. It says Deutsches Reich, because Austria was part of Germany now. And this crease reminds me of how lucky I am to be here, because he took my passport and he was just about to destroy it. And in the last moment, I suppose even evil people got consciences. Perhaps he might have had a son himself. He gave it back to me. But whenever I look at this, this is a copy of my original passport, which I got at home. And whenever I look at this and see this crease, I give thanks that I was able to leave. Now, it was a very, very long train, many carriages. And the first two carriages were already on Dutch soil. So we could hear the children sing in jubilation, those of the carriages in front of us. But we were still on German territory. So I believe we were the last carriage. And
did you have any food or drink?
well, I'm delighted to say that when we finally crossed the border, the Dutch people, I cannot praise them highly enough.
Hospitality.
We were showered with food and drink, and of course Holland, flowers. But it took a long time for the last carriage to get over to the border. And you know how it is when carriages shunt together. It takes time. And
Were you excited at this time?
I was funny. I was full of different emotions. I was excited. I was sad. I was already beginning to feel homesick. But most of all, I was looking forward to seeing the sea. It was always an ambition of mine. Don't forget, I was not yet 11 years of age. Oh, I can tell you the exact date, because here is, in fact, my first document, my first English document, issued in Harwich. And I arrived in Harwich on the 6th of July, 1939. My birthday is on the 12th of July. I was 1 week, just short of 1 week, of my 11th birthday. And I often look at this again. This is part of my document, my first English document. Actually, there's something very comical about this. It wasn't comical in those days, but now when I look at it, because it says that leave to land in the United Kingdom under the condition that I don't undertake any paid employment. Considering I was 10.5 years of age, I was wondering what employment I might have taken. But this is how I looked. And every male, Jewish male, whether he's a boy or man, had to have between his first name and his second name Israel. And
why?
Because they wanted to, that was to degrade us, to make us feel, now we wear it with pride.
That's anti-Semitism, isn't it?
Of course, well, it was Germans, of course, the anti-Semitism. The Nazis speaks for itself. Every woman, every female had to have Sarah. And I had to sign myself Otto Deutsch. It's not my name is Otto Deutsch.
To identify your faith?
To identify that I'm a Jew. And there was another identification that I'm a Jew, because on the first page of my passport there was a big J. Here we are. That means Jude, Jew. And there you see again Otto Israel Deutsch. They underlined my proper name, but it had to be Israel, and every female had to be Sarah. It was to humiliate us.
Even for young children, to do this to young children?
Precisely. And you know...
No justification.
It's part of the anti-Semitic way of life.
Did you at that particular time have any hatred for the Germans?
To be quite frank, at my age I didn't quite understand what was going on. Like other children, I didn't think that my parents were sending me away because they didn't love me anymore. I knew there were some evil people about, but just why and how, I had no idea.
Did you realistically think that you were going to be reunited with your family?
Well, that is important, because I told you that we were taken to the platform, and as far as I know, nobody was allowed on the platform. But my sister, her name was Adele, Daly we called her, she managed to get to the platform. I suppose a pretty young woman had her ways. And
How old was she?
7 years older than I, that's why she couldn't come. She was already 17, and it was from 6 to 16.
So did you know what happened to her?
Yes, I certainly know what happened to her. Like my mother and father, she was killed in Malitostenek. And that's why I've got this photo. Because I was in June at the site where the three of them were killed. My father came back, by the way. In 1939, there were no gas chambers as yet. There were horrible concentration camps. He came back because the only consolation I've got is that my mother and sister and father went hand in hand to their deaths.
Did you get any letters from any members of your family?
Up to the time when Holland was occupied, we had what was called Red Cross letters, 25 words, always the same. We're coming soon. But let's
to give you encouragement.
Yes, but let me give you. Let me go back to my sister. She managed to get to the platform, and I managed to get a seat by the window. And you know, I remember this so vividly when I talk about it that it seems odd that it's so many years ago. She ran after the train as the train began to move, and she shouted, "Otto sei schön brav, wir sehen uns bald wieder."
What does that mean?
Be a good boy, we'll see each other again shortly. And she must have known that we'll never see each other again. She surely must have known that. And the journey was a long one. And I don't remember much about the journey. But I remember arriving at the Hook of Holland. And I saw the sea for the very first time.
Were you talkative on the journey?
Well, talkative. I was excited. We were all excited. We were sad. And I did notice that there was a young toddler on the train. Couldn't have been 6 years of age. Somehow, in desperation, mothers were even smuggling to get their children onto these trains. We landed in Harwich. And
tell me about that.
I heard the English language for the first time. I couldn't speak a word of English, of course. And it was fascinating. People were dressed differently to us. We looked amazed. A different country. I'd never been away. We had crossed the sea. I can't remember if I was seasick or not. I'd like to think not. But I do remember the boat that we came on, the old Elenia packet boat, Amsterdam. And there we were in Harwich. And people were fussing about us. Reporters were there. People were giving us things, but I had no idea of what the future lay ahead.
What was going to be your future?
Well, we were now on an English train, crossing the Suffolk and Essex countryside, and arrived at Liverpool Street.
So we've arrived at Liverpool Street.
Not the Liverpool Street we know today. Now here is something which reminded me of it this morning. Because opposite Liverpool Street station, still to this very day, is a shopping arcade. It's where the Metropolitan Hammersmith Railway starts. And that was used for the children. And only members of the public with special permission were allowed to come to choose a child for temporary. That's always going to be temporary.
Foster.
Yes,
Foster care.
for temporary. And the girls went first, I suppose. But my cousin and I, nobody took us. And we were taken back to Liverpool Street for journey in reverse this time to Ipswich, It's the first English town I saw. And then to a camp, an old workhouse called Barham House, Claydon near Ipswich. I remember this address so well because it was my first address in England. And I put on the bottom of the address was taught to us. Barham House, Claydon near Ipswich, and I put in big letters England with great pride. Well, we stayed.
Was there an opportunity to write to your family?
There was, as I said, 25 words.
Okay.
All went via Holland. After the Netherlands were invaded, there was no more opportunity. I still got at home some of the early letters that my mother sent to me.
What age did you realise that you weren't going to be reunited with your family?
Now, that comes in a very important chapter. And I'll tell you about this in just a few moments because I want to give you the background of where I went. A Christian family, I got a photo of them here. Mr. and Mrs. Ferguson took us in because of their Christian beliefs. When I say us, my cousin and I, and 2 other boys, they took 4 refugee children in a little town called Morpeth, which is the northeast of England, near Newcastle. Never once did they make any attempt to convert us, despite the fact that they were very practicing Christians. Never before. In fact, if anything, they made sure that each month a rabbi would come from the yeshiva college in Gateshead, which was the nearest contact of Jewishness, to give us a Jewish background. But one thing they couldn't do was to organize a bar mitzvah. The nearest synagogue, I suppose, would have been Newcastle. I was bar mitzvah, but not at 13. I was bar mitzvah when I was 75, here in Stanmore. But you asked me at what point did I knew that I wasn't going to go back. Well, Mr. and Mrs. Ferguson were very kind. I keep repeating that because I remember this blessed memory. She was a piano teacher, and in the northeast of England, the front room, as I call it, the parlour, was completely out of bounds to anybody but to the vicar when he came on a Sunday, to people of real importance, but to us children, the front room was out of bounds because she had a piano there. She was giving piano lessons. But I remember so clearly Uncle Jim, Mr. Ferguson. It was Uncle Jim and Auntie Nell. He called me in the front room. And only me, not the other boys, just me. And I could hear Auntie Nell say, in Geordie accent, oh, by the way, I became very perfect in Geordie. Didn't you tell the lad? No, he's a canny lad, he's got to know. And he showed me a letter. And I've got a copy of this letter. It's from the Israelitischen Kultusgemeinde, from the Jewish organization, the Jewish Council in Vienna, to say that Herr Victor Deutsch, my father, born on the 21st December, the last address in Vienna, was taken on the 20th of May 1942 to Minsk, actually a suburb of Minsk, a forest, Malitrostenek. The same with my mother, and the same with my sister. And on arrival, they were just shot. In Malitrostenek there was no accommodation.
How did you feel when you heard this news?
Well, Mr. and Mrs. Ferguson expected me to burst out into tears. Tears wouldn't come. I froze until they left. And when they left, the tears never stopped. Because I realized from that moment onwards I was an orphan. And up to that
How old were
moment,
you at this stage, at this time?
well, at that stage I was 16.
16.
Not yet quite a man, but no longer a small child. And I had thought my father's a very clever man. He bound to have survived. I'm bound to find my parents. After the war, I would go back to Vienna, look at every displaced person camp, look everywhere. But now I realized that dream was not to be. And so I had to begin my life knowing fully well that I would never see them again.
What... Have you ever returned to Austria?
Yes, many times. I was there 2 months ago.
And do you have hatred for the people?
I'm often asked that question. I'm often, you know, people in my community where I live in Essex, some would say to me, how can you go back to Vienna, what they've done? But you know, I go to Vienna on a lecture tour to speak to schools. These children weren't alive in those days, nor were their parents. When I see people of my generation, of my age, yes, I do think...
What about the concept of revenge?
There is no concept of revenge, because
Why?
revenge, to me, revenge is wrong. It doesn't do anything. How am I going to revenge? What am I going to do? Am I going to take it out on these youngsters who I talk to? For instance, I've just come from a memorial service in Belsize Synagogue, and there were representatives of the German and the Austrian embassies there. The revenge...
Why do you think that they want to attend these ceremonies?
Well, they must have their own reason, protocol, I suppose. But I
Do
find...
you think it's guilt?
Pardon?
Do you think it's guilt?
Well, I can't speak for them. But all I know is revenge is not something that I subscribe to.
What about forgiveness?
Ah, that's different. I've got no right to forgive. How can I forgive for what was done? But that doesn't follow, logically, that I must have revenge. I think, if anything, these young people that I speak to when I speak in schools in both Austria and Vienna, they must have really and truly questions to their parents or to their grandparents. What did you do? But I can't subscribe to revenge or to hatred because it's negative.
Do you ever have bad dreams?
I used to. When I talk, especially now at this time of the year, you know, it's National Holocaust Day. I'm going this evening to a function, and I've just been to a function. You never forget. You never want to forget. And I've got to now go back again to that point, which I've already talked about, but that's interesting because you've just asked me something which is relevant. To this man who laid in the same trench as my father. They were both decorated soldiers for Austria in the First World War. And it was he who pointed out, look, that's a Jew over there, take him, our neighbor. Now, when you say, can I forgive? I certainly couldn't forgive Kurt Kovac, as he was called. But I would love to get in touch with his son, who was 6 months younger than I. We were friends.
Could you remain friends with him?
With the son?
Yeah.
Of course I could. Yes, I could. I've got no doubts about it. You see, to me, hatred is negative. Always will be. It doesn't do any good. That doesn't mean to say I can forgive. I certainly can't forget. That's what you asked me. Can I forget? I can't forget. You know, I relive that moment over and over again when Mr. Kovac, Uncle Kurt, He took me to a football match when he burst in and took my father. I can never forget that. No, I can't forgive that. But I Kurt was as old as I was. What did he know what his father was doing? I don't know. He was a member of the Hitler Youth, but I suppose there had to be.
What's the how important is it to educate these generations about the Holocaust?
Very important. Very, very important.
Why?
You know, the theme of this year's Holocaust information is speak up and speak out. That's the theme. All over, especially next Thursday and Friday, there'll be the theme, speak up and speak out. We should talk about it. We should talk about it. People should know. There is a time, as the time goes on, that people might forget. And it's because there's not too many of us left, where I was just now at the Belsize Park Synagogue. Oh, they're getting very frail now. I'm one of the youngest, and I'm 83. I saw people on their crutches, just about making it. No, we got to speak out.
Do you think the world has learnt from the Holocaust?
Evidently not, because the Holocaust, there are all sorts of Holocausts since then and probably in the future. I'm not completely unaware that there are other massacres going. And we should also remember, by the way, that it wasn't only Jews who suffered. Anybody who was inferior to the Aryan race, to the German race laws, gypsies, thousands of them, even Christians, believing Christians, not only Pastor Niemöller, there were people who spoke out, who dared to speak out. I've got here, first of all, our family on Shabbat. I was a lot younger then, and that's my sister there. She was 7 years older than I. This is my sister, more before she died. Beautiful girl. And I often think to myself, at 17, why did she have to die? She wanted to be a singer. She would practice singing. I was a horrid little brother. I would say, look, mother, she's screaming again. If only she was here. Now, why did she have to die? But I've got here...
Can you question...
Of course I question that. Why wouldn't I question that? Why did she, a girl of 17, what did she do? She... Of course you got to hear a picture of my mother, who had cancer, by the way. I carry this picture with me everywhere.
You look very much like her.
Well, I don't know.
You do.
That was already when she knew she was going to, when the Nazis had come. And finally, I've got a press cutting. I don't know whether this is unique or not, but it's very rare. And this was elderly Jews having to clean the muck that the horses made. In Vienna we got horse-drawn carriages, and where there's horses there's muck.
Can you tell me your thoughts and comments and opinions about Holocaust deniers?
I've often been asked about this, and even in Austria and in Germany, probably more so in Austria and Germany. You know, I would say to anyone who denies the Holocaust, where are my parents? Where is my sister? Where is that man who took my father out of his bed? I saw this. I can only deny something that I haven't seen, but I was there.
What's their motivation, do you think?
The motivation differs. Some, of course, can't believe that men can be as bestial as they have been. There are some people who feel surely nobody could do that, but they did. And there are others who do it out of political background, because they feel that in their political thinking Hitler was an idol to them. And they point out the good parts, what the Nazis did. Good. What they did for Austria was to stop unemployment. But the price that people paid is enormous.
When some people today are called Nazis, how do you feel about that? Is that a fair title to call somebody today a Nazi?
Well, we must be very careful about this business of calling people Nazis. Anybody who sort of disagrees with me isn't necessarily a Nazi. Not even a Holocaust denier. They're all different people who do things for different reasons. You know, there are many people of ill interests, and we must be very careful before we call people Nazis.
Should we be careful then to describe certain things that are going on, i.e. Darfur Holocausts?
No, what we must do is to make sure that we know the facts behind each story. For instance, young hooligans on a football field who shout out racial abuse. I don't think they even know what National Socialism meant. They're just hooligans, and they just indulge in something which is very, very bad. But to call them Nazis, they wouldn't know what a National Socialist is. There was the foulest doctrine is that who really has to be condemned is someone who feels that some people, because of their religion, color of skin, culture, language even, is inferior. The Germans felt that only full-blooded Aryans with the Teutonic blood in them, that they had a right really to enjoy life. All the others, even before the gas chambers came, were denied certain rights. As soon as Austria was incorporated in the German Reich, every day there were different laws published. A Jew mustn't do this, a Jew mustn't own a bicycle, not a pet. It didn't affect me, a 10-year-and-a-half boy. What did I care that a Jew couldn't be a lawyer, a stockbroker? I didn't know what a stockbroker was. But I tell you what did affect me. When I went to the local park and I saw Juden verboten, that I wasn't allowed to kick my football about in the park, that did affect me.
When you lecture globally, what's the most common question that you're asked?
Depends who I lecture to. We have different grades of schools that we go to. When we go to very youngsters, well, in fact, I don't want to talk too many talks to people who are less than 12. You get all sorts of funny questions. Did I see Hitler? But what I'm asked most of all is what you've asked me, have I got hate? And you know, we're all different, even the people who lecture, some have.
Do some Holocaust survivors have hate?
I'm sure they have, but I can't feel that I'm doing anything good by having hate. Especially to these youngsters who weren't alive in those days. And especially even to their parents, they weren't alive.
How did you feel during the Eichmann trial?
Well, I felt Eichmann was a wonderful piece of Jewish action, that they got him. It was very clever, and nobody could have had any pity about Eichmann and likes of Eichmann, especially people like me. And there were many more. But what I hate, if I do have to hate somebody, are people who don't deny the Holocaust, but to say, oh, I didn't know it was going on.
Do you think the Allied forces knew what was going on?
Well, certainly it was the Allied forces who were the first in Belsen. British forces first in Belsen. And when they saw that, they just couldn't believe that human beings could inflict this on other human beings. It was British soldiers who liberated Belsen. Many other places were liberated by others, but it was British, and I believe, who liberated Belsen. And I saw just walking skeletons. And what they personally thought, I don't know.
Do you think any races today are under threat of the Holocaust?
Is there a possibility of another Holocaust? Well, yes, there certainly is, and it doesn't have to affect the Jews. We mustn't associate Holocaust only with Jews. Look what went on in Darfur, in the Sudan. Look what goes on in Syria at the moment, where people's lives are just so cheap.
And Nigeria as well.
In Algeria, you know, But to come back...
What would you speak to these leaders that are murdering these innocent people today? What would you say? What would you say to these leaders?
I would say to the leaders, not only to the leaders, but to anybody. Everybody has a right to live. And I'm a humanitarian. I'm very proud to be a humanitarian. And nobody should be condemned because of their thought. You can't take away what people think. You can forbid it, action, but you can't take away what people think. Nobody should be condemned for what they are. And I feel there's good and bad everywhere.
Do you feel that your experiences has affected your life?
Well, it's bound to have experience. I wouldn't be sitting here now. Look, if at my age, I do know this for a fact, that towards the end, the German army was composed of some troops which were 16 years of age. The last stand in Berlin were youngsters, were Hitler Youth. If I wasn't a Jew, I could have been one of those. I could have been sent to the Russian front. My Jewishness is very important to me. I'm trying to catch up with Jewishness now, because don't forget, for 3.5 years I was in a Christian house, and I enjoy going to synagogue, and I make sure that I go to synagogue, and I have a great satisfaction when people wish me Shabbat Shalom.
Why is it important for you to go to synagogue?
To identify myself with being a Jew. My parents paid the price for being Jews, and so did my sister. Happily, living in a free country, I don't have to pay that price. Even if I can't follow the service as completely as other people do.
Are you grateful to the British authorities?
We never fail to say this, not only to the British authorities, but to the British people. There were certain parliamentarians who on that all-night sitting made sure that they were going to win the vote. I believe the establishment was against it. I don't think the Prime Minister of the day, Mr. Chamberlain, was very keen on the idea.
Of 10,000 children coming in?
Yes, yeah, unaccompanied. We might have been a burden. And our gratefulness is expressed in the fact that in the House of Commons there is a plaque by the Kindertransport Association giving thanks to the House and to the government and to the people of Britain for allowing us to come. There are 4 statues in different parts of Europe commemorating the Kindertransport. In Liverpool Street, where we arrived. In Vienna, where we left. In Berlin, where they left. And also there's one in Danzig. Now I've been, of course, very recently, as recent as 6 weeks ago, to the Hook of Holland, where the latest statue was unveiled, because that's where we left from. So, in fact, there's 5: Liverpool Street, Danzig, Hook of Holland, Vienna and Berlin.
Are these inspirational to you?
Very inspirational. And again, people take note of these things, even if they don't understand what happened. But it's good to be reminded. And as long as I can, I will remind you.
Otto Deutsch, thank you ever so much for joining Josh on our magazine and sharing your experiences. God bless you.